Well, hello everyone. It's nice to be back on another podcast episode of The Lowdown by the Analysis.tech team. Today, we think we have a really good episode for you. With me today, I'll have John introduce our guest, but with me today, co-presenting is my illustrious partner, John Reimer. Good to hear you on, John, and always nice to have you on a podcast.
Great to be here, Dave. And by the way, you've neglected to introduce yourself. You are the inimitable Dave Marcus, and I'm glad to be here with you.
I did. Sometimes I forget these things.
Okay,
All good.
so today, as Dave said, today we have a really, I'm excited about the episode today. Um, we have with us someone who we were introduced to by another guest, John Higginbotham, who is the managing partner at Paradigm Inc. John, welcome. We're very excited to talk with you about your journey from low code to vibing, which is certainly a pattern that we hear a lot about, all of us. John, welcome. Thanks for being with us today. And I wonder if you could start off by just telling us a little bit about Paradigm for those who don't know the company. By the way, guys, that is Paradigm's logo on John's hat, which I think I'd like to have that hat, but never mind. John, tell us a little bit about Paradigm, if you would.
Sure. And thanks, Dave, and thanks, John, for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here. And like you said, I'm John Higginbotham. Impressed you got my last name right. That is rare, so we're off to a great start. And I am the managing partner of Paradigm. We are a consulting firm that was low code. We do both low code and vibe coding now. And I'm also a vibe coder in residence at Lovable. And yes, that is my real job title there.
Very good. So, John, we like to kick off the podcast episodes with by asking our guests to tell us about their journey. How did you arrive at this point in your career? How did it play out?
Sure. I did not start in computer science. Actually started in culinary arts. And I still actively participate in culinary arts on occasion. But really my starting point with software development and in low code at the same time was I got a job at a wine importer. Shout out to Latitude, who was a medium-sized company doing big business with big retailers, and they were scaling and trying to stay lean and agile without investing into an engineering department and DevOps and all that. So they were keenly interested on using cutting edge tools to manage that growth. And to keep a low overhead. So, and I was their tech guy, like their systems guy. Like I was hired on just because of my proclivity for like building my own computers and things like that. So I got pushed into that area, and they had been looking at a bunch of low code platforms to make their own software. That's how they really got ahead. Was that they could like customize things to their business, do things their competitors couldn't. And that's why they were looking there. So I helped with that process, and we eventually landed on Mendix. And then I got into Mendix that way, went to Boston and did their whole training program. And from that point on, became a Mendix developer for 10 years. Moved on to different companies, of course, but eventually came to found Paradigm as a primarily Mendix-based and low-code-based consultancy, as I mentioned. And then within the past, 10-ish months, 10 to 12, have made the personal transition to, vibe coding.
Awesome. Thank you. Dave.
Awesome. So it's interesting to hear about this sort of transition. I think we're seeing more and more people right now, not necessarily moving wholesale over to some of these new platforms, but at least get on the one hand getting familiar, and on the other hand looking at where they apply best. And so, I'd love to talk a bit about the experiences you've had in building apps with Lovable, specifically like what kinds of applications have you and your team delivered utilizing a platform of Lovable. How do they compare to the kind of things that you were doing previously or even are still doing today with Mendix? And then also, if you can talk a bit about sort of, I'm going to call it the life cycle. We often hear a lot of these new vibe coding platforms being amazing for what I'm going to call idea to concept. And then from there, if it's something complex rather than something simple, then people are choosing different approaches to kind of get to execution. And so it'd be interesting hearing your experiences and sort of how you started, what you've covered, and how you would recommend using this technology for people looking at various classes of applications.
Sure. And I just want to point out, because I always think this is really interesting, especially coming from low code to vibe coding. I mentioned this to John before, but when I started with Mendix, 10 years ago in 2015, there was the contents of your question were high of mind. Especially looking on like online forums and doing my own investigation and asking that question that we were asking at that time, like, does Mendix or low code in general, like, is that a right path? Because the perception was that, yeah, it's good for like prototyping, it's good for that stuff, but like you're gonna want to get like real engineers in there at some point. And like uh, the answer that I'm going to give you for like vibe coding is like there's like a middle ground there. It's not that like with low code back then, it's it the answer was really like you'd need somebody technically minded, which became my role to really be a success, to run a business off of it. And with vibe coding now, I think you would greatly benefit from people with expertise, such as myself, to do it successfully. But of course, there's a spectrum of use cases, and you have your core business applications. You have uh, applications that are like on the fringe with other departments, and then you have like glue in between. And contextualizing this, I think my journey from a low code engineer to a vibe coder lends itself really well, because low code in general like seems like it fit well as a lot of glue. And I'm finding that vibe coding projects also have that same use case. There's the easy prototyping tools that like everybody talks about. Yeah, we can use it to prototype, or we could use like some like low hanging fruit of marketing, some marketing microsites or something like that. Things that don't carry necessarily a lot of like dependence or risk. But I'm finding that there is a huge world of internal tools that revolve around the core product offering of a business. And until now, those were only like engineering may not be invested in buying the time to deliver those tools for all of the departments, because it's expensive. But now that engineering is super cheap, that's just opened up a whole world for all these departments: procurement, product, project, marketing, like you name it, anywhere around the business. Like now that they have the ability to make their own tools, they are, and that's what we've been doing. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep, cool.
That's awesome. So, John, in a prior conversation that you and I had, you had mentioned that your journey to Lovable started with an existential crisis, and which is like, that's dramatic. Anyway, tell us a little bit about how you got interested in Lovable, and then really have made quite a commitment personally to it.
And then I think John, if you would just add to that, what made you specifically go to them? Because obviously there are a number of other options.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with the first piece with my existential crisis. So I think that this is I get the sense that this is prevalent, was back then and still going now. That there's some resistance fighting anxiety in the industry, and I definitely experience it, and still sometimes do feel like I'm falling behind. So, and to give you the context and the background, we had been a primarily Mendix shop for a while, 2 years at that point. And I was seeing what was happening in the market with low code, experimenting with it myself, and coming to the realization like, oh, wow, like I can see where this is going. This feels like Groundhog's Day with low code a while ago, but just can do a lot more. And gaming it out in my head, that's where I kind of like had a reckoning moment, call it, where I had to like really think about, is there going to be a future there for me? Is there going to be a future for my company? And what's going to set me up for a future? And that's what drove me to that decision. My partner, Scott, my business partner, Scott, took a little bit more convincing, and we baby stepped into it. We were like, okay, well, maybe we use it for like small business use cases, low risk areas, prototyping and things like that, and just kind of see how it goes. But the more that we used it, and then also the more that the tools matured, because they're still maturing at an amazing pace. We both became convinced. We had like arguments like, well, can't handle, like, scale might be an issue and complexity might be an issue. And so we're kind of like holding on to those things. It's like, okay, we'll save low code for enterprise hardcore use cases, but low code for this. But like, as there was new tools and we gained our footing and confidence in security, scale, complexity, things like that, that's what drove us to say, okay, yeah, like there's not a lot of arguments here. They can still be made. There's different use cases, but I think we're more full into low code, or at least I am. And I apologize, Dave, because in my soapbox there, I forgot the second part of your question.
Yeah, my question was, what led you specifically to them?
Yeah,
to others. Yeah.
Okay. It was, so at the time, and still is, there's a couple players in the market, and I want to just point out there that vibe coding is a broad term, and there's a spectrum within there. And so if we just make that differentiation really quickly, that there's what I call like the AI augmentation. It's more developer centered, and you're really talking about Cursor and Claude and Codex, those AI enabled developers, which you could call vibe coders too, but not. I don't think they really fall into like the popular definition of that now. And then there's the more full stack, more like low code equivalent product offerings of Lovable, V0, Replit, et cetera. And what drove me to them, I can't really say. I think that they were just more and are more design forward, more approachable. And that's what personally caught my eye. But all of them are like, they have pretty equitable feature parity with each other. So to me, I'm like, it doesn't really matter too much. But Lovable had a lot of hype at the time. They had just announced like their series fundings and stuff like that. So that's what drove me to them. I joined the Discord. I was on a mission to, remedy my anxiety through action, which is always the best way. of learning. Okay, I wanted to like become an expert here, so I had a big learning curve to go through, and the best way to do that was to join their Discord community where people were constantly coming in with their problems. That's how I learned, is through like solving real problems instead of reading. Um, and I became a regular there. Shout out to Lovable Discord, and just that's kickstarted my journey. That's how I got noticed as someone with experience with development, and eventually got invited to be their vibe coder in residence.
Awesome.
Cool. Brilliant.
Hey, a quick commercial break. If you are still with us, you are listening or watching the lowdown by analysis.tech. Analysis.tech is a strategy advisor. We are reachable at analysis.tech. Imagine that. And if you want to engage with us to help with strategy, to help with in product areas and channel and go to market, etc., Dave Marcus is available there. Myself, Dave has long experience in go to market planning and product planning and product development. I am known as the co-father of low code because I coined the term while working at Forrester. We also have Rob Koplowitz, who's an expert on digital process automation, Francis Carden, who is the only father of RPA, Rick Greenwald, our data guy, and Andy Bartels, our economist, former chief economist of Forrester. If you like what you like this content, tell your friends, tell your community, and hit the like button, hit the share button. And now we'll go back to our conversation with John. So, John, I think actually, Dave, over to you. I think you had the next
Yeah,
question.
sure. So, John, for obviously companies like Lovable, Replit, and then some of the developer-centered ones you talked about. And we're completely on board with you about this whole idea that it's a very distinct thing for different audiences. If you're a cursor user, you probably aren't a Lovable user. You may be using them but you're using them for very different things and in very different contexts. So we're totally on board with you with that, because the term vibing is kind of this very broad term today, and
Mm-hmm.
even vibe coding. And we're busy working on a bunch of new research in this particular area as well. But companies like Lovable, Replit, and others provide, this capability as this sort of new pure play AI centric development approach. But it's not like the low code players have been sitting still. Whether it's companies like Mendix, OutSystems, Pega, Appian, Microsoft, and many others have laid sort of a fairly sophisticated vibing platform on top of what they've done. And more recently, we're actually seeing now that those particular companies also are providing a mechanism whereby they've exposed their entire stack into tools like Claude Code, so that you can go and sit in Claude and go and build apps utilizing this sort of vibing based approach and in their environment without even knowing that you're there. And so I guess the big question here is, as someone sort of coming from a Mendix world, how much are you seeing the use of sort of vibing in these low code platforms, even though for most of these companies that's a relatively new innovation? And again, is once these companies provide this kind of capability, is there a distinction that says, why not use them and their vibing capabilities instead of something like a Lovable or a Replit?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects here. First, though, I think just to set the landscape is that I think that the low code companies are behind, but they are starting to come to fruition with their AI efforts, or at least from what I've noticed. Um, and the way that I think of it as, if like we think about like the evolution of software development, starting from basically just like, binary, like it's been just steps of abstraction. And
Yep.
it pains me to say this because I've like 10 years invested in low code skill set, but it seems like, low code was an evolutionary dead end. And that leads a lot of ground to cover for these platforms because they're getting to, like, they've come up with frameworks and being that are centered around drag and drop experience, but now competing with low code, which is just basically leapfrogged that whole branch. They have a lot of work to do, but I also want to caution too, because this isn't necessarily a zero sum game. And I wouldn't ever underestimate any company that has funding and capital and resources to get with it. So like but there is, I think, an argument, and this is a consideration, that vibe coding, call it, like, it can do more. I can do things with Lovable that I just never would have been able to do it with Mendix, and I probably couldn't today. Like fun hobby things. Like I'm really into UI and design, which has always been, seems like to me, like a low point in low code platforms, because it's like, we would tell clients, we can, anything you can dream up, we can make if we go outside of the platform and code things ourselves.
Yep.
Because things tend to look pretty boilerplate. And with vibe coding, it's like, okay, the world is really my oyster in terms of like UI frameworks. I never thought that I can make 3D model applications or games and things like that. So like in terms of flexibility, both on the consumer and the business end, I think there is more to offer on the low code side. Also, another consideration is cost and lock-in, and I think you can make valid lock-in arguments on either end, but and every platform has like their own pricing structure, so I don't want to like generalize or make some blanket statements. But our clients didn't. The ones that were moving out of Mendix, and people that I know didn't like the licensing model. When vibe coding came around, we're like, really interested in it because there's not as much vendor lock-in. They own their code, if they own their GitHub, and if they have control over their data, like there's not a lot stopping them. And it's for like you pay as you build, so it's like, seems like a no-brainer. So. Yeah, those are the considerations that we look at, of cost, how willing the companies are to be involved in new tech, and what their scale is going to look like. And also, but also, let me be clear. A lot of our clients are still using Mendix. We still support Mendix. Like, we even hire new people to support those. So it's not like they're going away. It's just that we're in a servicing and maintenance mode. I'm not investing in any like new opportunity areas for low-code or marketing in that realm.
Okay. John, over to you.
Interesting. So one of the questions I had brought to this, I think you just addressed, which was how much of a consideration are the low-code business models when your clients and prospects look at vibing as an alternative? And I think you've said, that a lot of the clients were not happy with Medic's pricing model, their business model. Do you see that pretty broadly, John?
It just yes and no. Some people don't care. Some people have great like giant budgets and they don't really care. Others that are more cost sensitive, it's always, they just love to complain about, who doesn't love to complain about licensing costs. So when they're, for the big companies are spending millions, if there's opportunity to cut that down, they'll definitely take it.
Yeah.
So John, just to add to what John asked a minute ago, what are you seeing in terms of the sort of commercial model, even with a vibe coding player like a Lovable? And so here's what I mean by that. There's a standard
Mhm.
pricing model for engaging with them, and they have multiple tiers to this thing. But at the same point in time, these things consume tokens, a lot
Yeah.
of tokens potentially. And so, I guess, do you have any advice for, when I went through my own experience working with these tools and I started looking on an ongoing basis of what the cost was for actually doing what I was trying to do, I was seeing that I had to be fairly careful about what I was doing. So, as an example, don't prompt 1,000 times to make all these minor changes, because every single time you're doing that, you're consuming a whole lot of stuff that is a cost that you hadn't necessarily anticipated because you thought that you were just paying a standard pricing model at the beginning. And so, how do you guys think about that, particularly as you guide clients?
We have like two models of engagement, and they're usually paired together, because we'll usually be hired to help come in and do build outs. And how we use our credit efficient is really like on us.
Yeah.
But we also offer upskilling, and for these companies, so that they can like do it themselves. That's usually the goal. And so there are, and you are right. So there is like there's methods, approaches to know on where you're going to be the most cost efficient with building. And it's often done up front in planning. And every day, like every month, there's like new techniques, and the models are, as you guys know, just getting like better and better. So like my recommendations last month are like different this month
Yeah.
on how to save credits, and like they're doing a lot more, and they're doing better in building and interpreting intent. So like and my wife, for example, she runs her own business, and she just goes to town on Lovable. Probably disregards most of my advice, but but is surviving. Like
Yeah.
she's just like in it and doing it. She's a particular type of person, but like, and I'm sure she's wasting a lot of credits. But like in the grand scheme of things, like I've written, the value to cost is so huge that even like if I'm a decision maker, I'm like, okay, like, are you going to spend like waste a couple $100, even a couple thousand on like credits?
Yeah.
Like compared to, I've written about 1.5 million while I've been at Lovable, 1.5 million lines of code for last 50 days. Traditionally, without any AI augmentation, that would have been like 10 to 50 years, depending on
Yeah.
how you look at it, of like a traditional development. So like, okay, that's millions of dollars probably accumulatively on the traditional path, compared to the thousands that maybe of credits that I've spent. So like on that lens, it's how do you argue?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Great.
Um, how, so you have gone all in on Paradigm, and have become an expert, and you're, tracking things. And as you say, things are changing really quickly. That your knowledge has to be really valuable. How has that changed Paradigm's direction? Do you think Paradigm becomes more of a vibing, vibing expert, vibe coding expert, Paradigm expert, or is it Paradigm, Replit, and others, who are similar, who have similar, product profiles, and the low code work becomes kind of maintenance, and not really the key to the growth. How do you see the firm? How do you see it affecting the firm's direction?
Yeah, and there's a lot of strategy considerations here. If anyone listening is running their own firm or thinking about this as well, I'm sure a lot of this will resonate. But we are. I think you don't ever want to over-index on one thing, especially now with the way that things change quickly. There's new leaders every day. However, you also want to invest in relationships that are going to be beneficial for your firm. So you take that into account. That's, I mean, part of the reason why, we're um, outwardly, lovable coupled,
Mm-hmm.
but we also, maintain expertise in like those AI, those developer augmented tools, Cursor, Claude, Codex. And we still use that in conjunction with our lovable work and vibe coding work, in general,
Mm-hmm.
um, because we want to keep current, and also it's just in some cases it's easier, better. Um, so I think you want to diversify, but we also want to stay with the latest tools and the appetite. The FOMO in business is really high.
Mm.
Now it might die down, but like everybody is really eager. I've never really experienced this with running my business of like clients kind of just falling into my lap sometimes, or
Huh.
getting responses. And it might be that I have, some like impressive titles, but like uh, our paradigm, we're running events, we're doing private, like executive things, and we're getting people in the room that I just don't think we ever could have got in the room before,
Yep.
Interesting.
because they're so interested. And you guys know, like, as just like positioned experts, to like everybody's really interested to know, okay, how can I leverage this, how can I extract value, and the people that know that are invaluable. So
Right.
if I can deliver that to them, then great. I'd love to be that messenger.
Yep.
Right. Awesome. Hey, John,
I
thanks so much.
I did have one more question to you, John, before we close off. Um, with the sort of partnership that you have with Lovable, if you could have three things that you don't have today, either technology related or business related, as part of this engagement with Lovable, what would those three things be?
That's an interesting question. Could you give me a
Yeah,
little bit
so,
more like
so, so,
context?
so let me give you an example. When in my use of some of these tools, which is very recent,
Mhm.
and trying to build out something that is fairly complex, one of the things that I've seen with all of these tools, not necessarily just Lovable, is the fact that, behind the scenes, I would have loved a model that just represents itself naturally for the application I'm creating, rather than have to sort of prompt the thing to say, give me some kind of a model. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would have loved is much better integration with third party stuff. The fact that I have to know things like a client ID and a secret and things like that is just a pain in the butt. And I actually don't want to know that. And the world of integration has moved way past that world. And then the third one is I'd love for workflow to be handled, especially complex workflow to be handled in a much more intuitive way than what I see just with like, coded logic. So those are just three functional examples for me of things I'd love to see these kind of vendors invest in. But there are also things I'd love to see them do on the business side. And that's sort of an example. So, I was just wondering whether you have anything that says when you wake up in the morning to go and say, man, if they had that, it would make my life so much easier.
Yeah, there's things that I wish were in the platform, like all the time, but there are things that would cater to me, a specifically like a power user, that probably wouldn't be relevant to, like, and I understand this, like, to 99% of the user base. Um, like things like, point in time recovery,
Yep.
things that are a little bit more enterprise related,
Yep.
platform functionality. To your point, like things could always be like more visible, less abstracted, or at least just maybe a little bit more transparency for power users, so they could see how like flows or workflows happen in maybe a visual way, for example.
Yep.
Um, but I will say but like on the integration point, I will push back a little bit, at least with Lovable. Like their connectors, like they have a huge list of connectors now, and if you say, "Hey, hook up to HubSpot," it'll ask you for a secret. You can't get hard to get around that, but there's not a lot of setup anymore.
Cool.
Awesome.
Brilliant. John, over to you.
John, thanks so much. This has been a really enlightening conversation. We really appreciate you sharing your experience with us and our audience. We wish you the best as you plumb these very interesting times and navigate these very interesting times. And we'd love to check back in with you somewhere down the road, see how things have progressed. Very much appreciate the conversation today. Thank you.
Absolutely, John. Dave, thanks for having me. I really
Yeah, it's
enjoyed it.
been awesome to have you on. Really, really good insight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.